What did I say? What did she say? 28. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, Rebel Girl, 1955. Introduction. Carlo Tresca's efforts to publicize the trial bore fruits quickly as radical labor organizer Elizabeth Gurley Flynn paid early visits to the imprisoned anarchist, the subject of this document, before embarking on a national tour to draw attention to their situation. Nothing much was said or done about the arrest of Sacco and Vanzetti by anyone at first. They were very humble and obscure foreign-born workers. A small Italian committee of close associates was set up in Boston, but soon they were to realize that this was a different matter, not a political charge, but a criminal one. Sacco and Vanzetti were bundled into cars and taken around from one town to another, where they were put on exhibition. Strange people were brought in to look at them, while the police queried insistently, "Are these the men?" And insisted, "Sure, these are the guys all right." They were told to put on certain caps, to crouch down, which was very confusing to Sacco and Vanzetti. It was not until after this first trial of Vanzetti that I heard the names of Sacco and Vanzetti. I was then secretary of the Workers' Defense Union in New York City. A woman in New England who occupied a similar post was Mrs. Marion Emerson of the New England Defense Conference. We were both busy with the struggles growing out of the Palmer raids, raising bail, feeding families, hiring lawyers. I went several times to Boston to speak on behalf of hundreds of deportees herded on Deer Island. Dr. George Galvin, a noted physician, was chairman of a huge meeting there. Just before I left New York on one of these trips, Carlo said, "Elizabeth, there are 2 Italian comrades in big trouble in Massachusetts on account of Salsadeo. You investigate while you are there, and maybe get the Americans to help." He gave me the address of A. Felicini, who worked on a local Italian newspaper, Le Notizia, in South Boston. I asked Mrs. Emerson, who I learned on this trip was related to Ralph Waldo Emerson, if she knew about them. She had vaguely heard of them through the local press. She agreed to go with me to investigate their plight. We went into the turbulent but colorful, overcrowded slums of old Boston, now a little Italy, with its crooked streets and narrow houses, in search of this unknown man on an obscure paper. We found him, but he spoke so little English we had to wait until he found an interpreter. He was very glad to see us and eager to tell us everything. He called together the Italian committee, and for the first time 2 Americans heard the story of Sacco and Vanzetti. Thus began my 7 years' labors to help save Sacco and Vanzetti. In October 1920, Mary Heaton Vorse and I visited Nicola Sacco in the Dedham jail. Fred Moore arranged the interview so that we could give some publicity to their plight. Mary wrote a fine article for The Nation, which began, "We drove through the sweet New England towns." It was autumn. The pungent smell of burning leaves was in the air. As jails go, it was not a bad place, Mary said. It looked like a library with its large central rotunda. Only men were put away on the shelves, not books. Then a handsome youth, slim, erect, with flashing eyes and a gay smile, came rapidly toward us. This was Sacco. He was 30 years old. His blue shirt was clean and neat, open at the throat. He greeted me with enthusiasm. "Elisabetta, I know you. I heard you speak for Lawrence Strikers," he said. Then he greeted Fred Moore and met Mrs. Vorse, who spoke a little Italian, which gladdened his heart. We all sat down. He told us of himself and his views. The idea, he called it, which to him meant social justice. No government, no police, no judges, no bosses, no authority. Autonomous groups of people. The people own everything. Work in cooperation. Distribute by needs. Equality, justice, comradeship. Love of each other. Eager words like this flowed in a torrent from his lips. He hated to be idle. He wanted to be able to work. This bothered him. He said he was ready to die for the idea, for the people, but not for gunman job. He spoke of how he had worked all his life. His hands were the skilled hands of a shoemaker, and they were for work, not for killing. To steal money, to kill a poor man for money, this is insult to me, he said passionately. He threw back his head and explained, "I am innocent. I no do this thing. I swear it on the head of my newborn child." His vehement cry, "Io innocente! You are killing an innocent man," were on the words he shouted at the craven jury months later. To Sacco, a cold-blooded murder of a factory employee to carry out a mercenary holdup was unthinkable. He was hurt, deeply hurt, to be accused of such a thing. One hand had remained tightly clasped during our talk, but in his anger he spread his fingers apart and a little piece of metal fell out, a Catholic Sacred Heart medal. He smiled with embarrassment and explained, "Boss's wife, good Irish lady, she came, she cried, and she said, 'Keep this, Nick, it will save you.' I no believe," he said, "but I no want to hurt her feelings, so I take." I was well acquainted with this idealistic type of kind and good Italian anarchist who might kill a king as an act of social justice, but not a mouse. I believed Sacco when he said, Elisabetta, I am innocent. I believe it now, after 34 years. So confident was he of his innocence that sunny afternoon that he had no fear. He was sure when he told his story in court he would go free. He did not know that he was approaching the valley of the shadow of death. He feared no evil because the truth was with him. But greed, corruption, prejudice, fear, and hatred of radical foreign-born working men were weaving a net around him. After my return from visiting Sacco and Vanzetti, we began, through the Workers' Defense Union, to arrange public meetings and to raise money on their behalf. On October 4th, 1920, we sent out as a complete factual statement as was possible then. First in English, we stated prophetically, if convicted, they will be sentenced to electrocution. Electrocution. Electrocution is identified as an act of torture. Electrocution is also a form of electronic warfare, including a form of electronic warfare that can impact someone's neurochemistry. To be continued.